Greetings, I am Shadrach Kubiani, CEO and co-founder of Coronet Blockchain. I'm very grateful to GIIES hosting me to include a perspective at this critical summit on the aspect of innovation ecosystems curating and retaining value for startups and marginalized communities. We've always believed that innovation and sustainability must always go together. Let me unpack this using the case of Blockbuster and Netflix. On paper, this was an incredible alignment and a brilliant opportunity for both parties. If you look at both, on the one hand, Blockbuster had a strong balance sheet, had established systems, a global footprint, and of course, a muscle memory that speaks to their legacy. On the other hand, Netflix had a brilliant foresight to actually see beyond the bend where the market was headed. And therefore, demand supply was about to shift very incredibly. And they were already solutioning for that value curve. And in the same token, Netflix had discerned what the next big thing is. Put the two together, you get an incredible innovation fit, forming an ecosystem of value, an incredible yield for the world at large. But very unfortunate, that bus was missed. And even more unfortunate, that Blockbuster went bust. Very closer to home, I'm going to make an example. We set out some months ago, leading to now, to solution African supply chains by first and foremost configuring and deploying a valuable blockchain-driven digital infrastructure. Those were our vision objectives. Our outcomes through those objectives was simply leveraging and utilizing with a bold intent emerging frontier technologies with blockchain as the centerpiece of that build, in order to attain or achieve tech, or particularly blockchain, for social good. Our innovation ecosystem contained 4 critical moving parts that really balance the equation. What are they? The legacy firm involved in the build and the ecosystem had experience under the belt in excess of more than 100 years tech giant muscle memory. We've also, leaning forward with the build, have invited successfully through design thinking and co-creation methodologies all the critical supply chain participants that were necessary to get the build off the ground with real on-the-ground scenarios infused into the solution that is Africa-facing. Ourselves, the startup, with a gigantic vision, we had the requisite hands-on muscle memory of how the industry works. We had the knowledge of the terrain, and we really, in and out, knew what the Africa-specific supply chain pain points were. And of course, leveraging all those, we also added a very necessary macro-level industry focus so that the solution itself can lend the micro-level moving parts into solutioning the specific Africa supply chains at various tiers to co-create tangible value for all the participants that are captive and are insidiously looking for value in those value chains. Then again, from that use case example that is fast becoming a benchmark for development on the Africa continent, is showing us, as revealing to us, that solutioning macro level difficulties with an awareness of realities on the ground at a micro focus level, requiring input or heavy lifting from all the players and participants in the value chain, with the expert focus of terrain knowledge on the startup end and legacy framework on the enterprise level, are just some of the benchmarks that we are establishing in terms of how to better build tailored innovation ecosystem for tailored Africa pain points. Michael Dell was known to have said, "Ideas are an abundant commodity, but implementation of them is not." So on the aspect of strategy being relevant to innovation ecosystems, I'm going to make an example that dates as far back as 1908. The much loved Oreo biscuits or sandwich cookies of Oreo, some of you may not be aware that they actually had quite an interesting journey from an innovation perspective. Hydrox, I spell the name Hydrox, is actually the name of a company and brand that was first on the scene to release a sandwich cookie that is the exact replica, look and feel, of what we now fondly know as Oreo sandwich cookies. So what happened there? The aggressive nature and the upper hand through strategy with which Oreo went to market, even though they were second on the scene, is incredibly illustrative of why strategy, when it comes to the intentionality with which innovation ecosystems should be formed to support innovation and support the bold outcomes of that ecosystem, is very, very critical. As you can see, same branding, very, very closely similar recipe. Believe it or not, same blue, black, and white color schemes. However, implementations and outcomes very different. So strategic was Oreo that their traction to market ended up reflecting very badly on Hydrox, that eventually had to shut down, because whilst they were first on the scene of the invention and launch of the sandwich cookie that is much loved with milk, their strategy was not relevant, nor was it sensitive to the market terrain that the sandwich cookie was operating in. And as they say, the rest is history, because Hydrox eventually, with the copycat shadow hanging over them, they had to shut down. So in summary, strategy, very relevant to creating and sustaining healthy innovation ecosystems. On a parting note, how do you create value for your innovation ecosystem? We will do well to take a few steps back and remember that currently the entire world is being held at gunpoint by a tiny virus called COVID that we can hardly see. The implications are simple. Innovate or die. I repeat, innovate or die. Maybe not physically, hopefully, but economically or your company might die a very slow or quick death. Let me elaborate by using a scenario that unfolded in the 60s going into the 70s. I'll illustrate by zooming in on the nation of Israel. So late 60s, the fanfare, the celebration, and the relief by the Jewish nation that now was returning from the four corners of the world to the land they can call home. As they settled, perhaps there was a bit of a miscalculation on their part. They didn't see this one coming. They didn't know that they themselves will be held at gunpoint by armed enemy forces, or should I say, not a very, very, very interesting neighbors. Most of you are familiar with that war in the terrain of Israel and its neighbors. This is not about the war. This is about innovation. So very early on in the war, when Israel found itself under attack and taking all forms of eros and hostility, they took a few steps back as a nation and realized that they cannot continue to seek returns on their egos and cannot continue to seek to keep a siloed environment across research and development priorities of the country, military mechanisms of the country, and legislation and policy, the startup ecosystem, and of course, the manufacturing and other sectors. Very intuitively and urgently, a framework had to be created that became the norm for the country of Israel. That is still the situation today, where a military general, just one or two calls, can reach the most agile startup that can be able to solution them with the next invention they need in the most incredible short time span. Or an R&D facility can actually inform the insights of the military in terms of military prowess, military intelligence, responses, and hopefully just merely preventions. Across silos that in other countries, they still remain world apart, even though they are attempting to fight on the same side, especially economically. Today, industries, they still remain divided. They still fail to get the basics right in normal industries of what the innovation ecosystem requires for it to work. A quick tour across the globe to observe some of the graveyards where companies died a very painful death because innovation in their midst was not a welcome guest, a culture, or a lever that they were willing to leverage. Nokia, dead. Blockbuster, dead. Kodak, dead. And you know what? Not far from home is a music selling store, a national brand across South Africa known as Musica, whom few days ago it was announced that come end of May 2021, the music is going to stop. As I said at the beginning, at this segment, innovate or die, particularly when we are facing the battle of the gun, economically speaking, with the ramifications of the COVID-19 virus. Wishing you well as you regain your focus, regain your priorities, and build from the word go into your muscle memory the reflexes of innovation and the mechanisms that enable and leverage the innovation value. Thank you.